Good afternoon, everyone. Working through just one technical difficulty. We have Mariana Nork from ANCOR here to kick us off, and for some reason, we just can't get her mic turned on. Well, Mariana, we would have loved your introduction, and it would have been spectacular, I know. But in the essence of time, let's just go ahead and get started. Um, I'm hoping that everyone can see the screen. Scott and Greg, can you confirm?
Yep.
So we're good here on the front screen. Well, great. So a couple of housekeeping items as we get started into this session today around becoming a data-driven organization and lessons learned from Keystone and from the BI Collaborative. First is, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. What we will do is wait till the end, and if time allows, we will respond to the questions in the chat at the end. If time does not allow us to do it in this meeting, we're going to publish responses to all the questions and send that out to everybody. So you will get your questions answered one way or another. And then the second is that we are going to use an interactive technology today with Menti so that we can actually interact with each other and learn some things from each other. So as we do our introductions here, if you can scan the QR code or if you can go to menti.com and enter the code number on the screen here, that would be great. It will allow you to participate and let us learn a little bit from you as we learn a little bit from our panel. So speaking of our panel, let's start with introductions. And Scott Bachek, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Bachek. I am the CEO and co-founder of the BI Collaborative. So welcome. I'm excited for the day.
Do a little bit of your background, Scott.
Sure. I have a deep background in healthcare. I like to kind of play where technology interacts with organizational performance. So I spent a number of years on the physical health side, a handful of years within the payer side, and in the past 6 years here in human services. So yeah, I mean, I am a technologist, but I enjoy using that technology to help organizations get better.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. Greg, a little bit of your intro and background, please. That'd be great.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Willems, and I'm a Vice President of Operations for Keystone Human Services. And I just want to send my thank you to Bob and Scott for inviting me to this, and for ANCOR for holding this webinar for everybody. Keystone is a large nonprofit where we do provide services in 4 states, primarily in Pennsylvania, but we also do services in Delaware, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and internationally in the Republic of Moldova and in India. And while the majority of our supports are for people with intellectual disabilities, we also support people on the mental health spectrum, autism, and Head Start services, as well as a service dog program. My background is I've been in the industry, as you can tell, for a few years. I started off as a direct support professional and worked for Imagine, which is a very technology forward company in Colorado as their COO. And then I moved out here to Pennsylvania to become the Vice President of Operations for Keystone Human Services about 7 years ago.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate your time and the stories and the lessons learned that we're going to learn from you today. So appreciate that. So let's go ahead and leverage the technology and learn a little bit about our attendees. And so the first question is, what describes your role? So we can see from all of our attendees here, what spread of different types of responsibilities are attending, flowing in. I was going to say, wow, all of our finance people are still crunching numbers. Must be month end. All right, fabulous. So pretty good cross section, heavily populated with C-suite leadership and operations, but and a good quality compliance. So that's fantastic. And then just a little more insight that would be great is, and let's have a little fun, a little icebreaker. So if your work week was a movie genre, what would it be? And as you read those, there intentionally is not you know, um, all the above, right? Because I think as we work in this industry, it depends on what day it is. You could fall into any one of these, right, Greg?
Absolutely.
Heavily dominated by the drama and the action and the go, go, go. That's awesome. So thank you for your participation. We're going to look for that continued participation as we go out throughout our time here together. But if you think about, this question about the genres, it's because of the industry, right? We work in an industry that's historically been underfunded. And anyone noticed lately Medicaid in the news and being under pressure? Well, the history of not being the funding that we have has created a lack of IT resources, the lack of adoption of technology. It's very different being in a larger provider to a smaller provider. And there's a lot of challenges, right, as an industry because of the underfunding that maybe other industries don't have. And so we haven't been able to take advantage of what some of the advances in technology can deliver. So we're going to start with a couple of early insights here into some definitions and understanding even more about our audience. And you can see where you are compared to peers. And so that first definition is around interactive dashboards. And so this is an example of an interactive dashboard. You can build these in technologies like Power BI or Tableau or Domo. And when we say interactive dashboard, it's not just having these KPIs represented, but if I was in here and I changed the dates, this entire dashboard would update to that data set, right? If I wanted to understand just something about medication errors and I clicked on medication errors, the whole dashboard would update just to medication error insights. Another example would be in this New York example would be if I clicked on a geography like the Bronx, this whole dashboard would update just to the data set for the Bronx. So the question that we wanted to understand from a market perspective is, how many of you have adopted or implemented interactive dashboards into your environments today? And then what we'll do is see that sort of split in the marketplace and give you an idea to compare yourselves where you are compared to peers. And then we'll talk a little bit about some stories of first dashboards as we tally the results here. So interesting. So I was thinking maybe a 50-50 split. It's actually weighted a little more to we have not implemented or adopted interactive dashboards. Greg, I'll go to you first. Could you share a story of, one of your first use case dashboards, and then not only why that use case was selected, but the impact on the organization from the old way to the new way?
Sure, Bob. I think one of the areas where we were struggling initially we all look at things from a reporting standpoint, and I think we all gears toward how a service is performing financially. And what are the metrics, or what is causing that service to either perform positively, or is it not performing well? And when we started talking with the BI Collaborative, one of the areas that we were struggling with was our employment services. And if any of you work in that spectrum, you understand how complicated that can be with the different type of service types, where units are moving a lot. You have job development, you might have job support, you might have a career assessment. You have all these different funding streams that as a person gains skills in employment and they're moving into job trials or job development or even on the job support, those units can move fairly dynamically, and you have to really be able to monitor that utilization. Are you underserving? Are you overserving somebody? And how quickly can you adopt to one of those? Parallel to this, not only utilization, we worked on employee productivity. Because while we may be managing the units well or not well or going under or over, we found out that our employee productivity was varying between 20% and 80%. And just by starting to create this, putting it on a dashboard and getting the data out and sharing it with the teams, we were able to dramatically change that productivity by over 30% over just a short time period. I'm talking 3 or 4 months, and turned a program that was operating underwater into one that was starting to show our retention, was starting to be managed much more proactively. And one of my favorite management axioms is by Peter Drucker, who talks about those items that get managed, that get measured, get managed. And this is really what we saw here as we were starting to measure, we were starting to report on the productivity and the utilization of units. And all of a sudden we went from a service that was really struggling to one that was actually one of our better, not only financially reporting, but outcomes reporting, because we could see how long people were in a specific service or type of service within the employment program. So overall, it not only had great results for us financially, but it really helped us move our mission forward.
Thanks for sharing that example, Greg. And Scott, you work with so many providers. Is there a common area where most providers start, or what drives the thinking on where to start from your experience with several providers, many providers?
Well, I think Greg kind of hit it right. It's because of the industry, and 80% of our costs are within labor costs. So people getting their hands around and understanding their labor, both from a productivity standpoint for those programs where productivity is relevant, to looking at staffing mix for maybe residential programs that is kind of the focus there. So a lot of people start there. The other areas where they start is in census information, trying to understand the populations that they serve. I can tell you though, Bob, a lot of people start wrong in that they try to do too much out of the gate. And they create things that are too complex. One of the keys to think about if you're going to go down this journey of business intelligence, less is more. Starting in a simplistic form, and I can tell you less is not easy, but less is more, and it's better for people to digest. So people try to do too much out of the gate. They make it complex. They make it too difficult to understand, and thus it becomes undervalued and not used. And so we've worked with a lot of different providers who already had reporting that no one looked at. So because of those things. So
I love the sharing of the insight of start somewhere, but start simple. Find the use case, find the pain point. Don't try to boil the ocean in your first project. That's a great insight.
For sure. And go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say, and to your point, one of the things on Scott's when making it simple for the productivity report is we could just pull up an employees and just show them what their productivity was. And that was a simple dashboard, getting the information to the right people at the right time so they could see what they were doing. So I absolutely support that simplicity, getting it to the right person at the right time.
Great insights.
And Bob, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much, but I think you'll hear it through the rest of our discussion today that just a dashboard is not enough, right? It has to be embedded in much more, which we're going to talk about.
Planting seeds. I love it. All right. So great transition to then the next question. And this is, again, just the definition. So let's start with the definition of a balanced scorecard. And so what we wanted to get some insights here from you and as the marketplace is, let's start with the definition. So when we look at this, this represents the BI Collaborative. All of our reporting is organized into modules, and you can see that we give performance insights into all different areas across the organization. So areas in finance, quality compliance, HR, and operations. And the idea of the balanced scorecard really, it came out of Harvard in the 90s. Dr. Robert Kaplan and David Norton introduced this idea where historically all organizations, no matter what industry, really measured their performance just in financial metrics. And really, it was the idea to include non-financial performance indicators to create what is a balanced scorecard. So here's just really a basic example of that. So you can see from the perspective, there's different areas of the organization: finance, operations, quality, compliance. You've got the strategic decision by an organization on what was important in each of those areas, what defined the KPR, the target, and the actual. So that's the definition of a balanced scorecard. And the question to attendees and to the marketplace is, this doesn't have to be an interactive report, right? We're just wondering, do you have a single source of truth for financial, operational, HR, and quality compliance? So do you have, from this definition, a balanced scorecard? And again, doesn't have to be interactive technology. You could be a static report, an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. We're just curious if you take this strategic approach. Not the same percentage, right, of actually leveraging Power BI or some technologies to build an interactive dashboard. This is a more complicated strategic decision, so I'm not surprised that it doesn't mirror the percentages, but I think it's an interesting reflection to all of us, to you as attendees, on where you stand if you are doing this. And then I'm curious, Greg or Scott, what can the audience learn from your experience in helping providers create their balanced scorecards? You work with providers to actually build these. What would you share, not only from those experiences, but your past experiences in all industries?
So I think it goes back to the principle of a balanced scorecard, Bob. It was research based, right? So how they came to that and how it's used is documented, right? So I think it does give you an overall healthy picture of the organization. I think the other piece that it does, and so it's not just doing it, it's or using it, it's how you use it. I think the other piece that's really important is it creates a vehicle for your initiative and your journey of becoming data driven to be a top-down driven. This piece of it, looking at the balanced scorecard and looking at which indicators are critical for your organization, has to come from the leadership group. It doesn't always have to come, because you'll learn as your organization becomes more mature in this, it'll come from different places. But to start, it should come from the leadership group to determine on a balanced scorecard, what are those key performance indicators within each of these realms that are important to the organization. And then that creates your roadmap. And it helps create focus and driving the organization forward. So I think it's not just the concept of using it, Bob, but it's how you use it to move the organization along.
Yeah, and we're going to get into even some of those details as we move forward as well. Greg, what are specific things that Keystone's experienced in this journey that you would think would be good for our audience to hear?
So Keystone is a very well developed and has I think a very solid reputation in the community. We've been around for 50 years, and we have a standing quality department and a standing compliance department. What the balanced scorecard did for us, it's probably the most powerful organizational tool that we've implemented, certainly since I've been at Keystone, because what it allowed us to do is work through in connecting those 4 areas of quality, HR, and operations and financial, and get the right people in the room to say, this is what I need to do to be effective at my job. And as you work through this organized process, it helps you look at not only internal KPIs, but what possible external KPIs are there that are important to maybe your families, to your funders, to your partners within the organization, to ensure that you're pulling the data and getting it out to where it can be managed most effectively. I think one of our lessons learned was we didn't do a balanced scorecard for the organization. We ended up doing a balanced scorecard for each service area. We recognized where we needed to do. So we started off with our largest service, which is intellectual disabilities in Pennsylvania, but we're moving it into our mental health services and our capital area Head Start programs and our services in other states. And one of the interesting things is then you're starting to see what are the organizational KPIs that are attuned across all of those service areas. So, and they may have specific ones that are more impactful that are part of a funding formula for perhaps mental health. So they may, they might have a slightly different KPI for their operational need, but you're starting to see consistent KPIs, and what it allows by getting the right people in the room, then they're able to really, as I said earlier, enunciate what they need to be more effective at their job and to produce the quality outcomes that the organization wants to see.
Yeah, I love the highlighting of both organizational and programmatic scorecards, right, at that level, and then the mentioning of the multidisciplinary teams. You're going to hear that, I think, in further comments as we get into other topics here as well. So
yeah, I was going to echo
Scott.
that, Bob. I think Greg makes a really important point. One of the top challenges of organizations is that they're siloed, and not just human service organizations, all organizations. What this concept does, as Greg spoke to, is it helps break those silos. It helps to get that multidisciplinary team working together. So it's a really important point.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, this is where it gets fun. So what word would describe, and when you look at your application, you should be able to enter more than one, but you only get one chance. So I think you get the chance to enter 3 words, but what words would best describe data and reporting in your organization? We'll see how this word collage starts to populate. I'm hoping. No responses. There we go. Here we go. Oh, fragmented, tedious, siloed, unclear, delayed,
Manual,
tedious. Yeah, as words get repeated, they get bigger. So tedious and manual. I did like to see some positive. There was a collaborative one in here. It's good to see at least a couple positive. Old school. Oh, there's organized. Organized and collaborative, a couple positive responses. That's what you would expect, I would think, right? Going back to the point of an industry that's been underfunded and hasn't had the ability to invest in both in IT, human resources, and technologies. I'm curious, Greg, what words would you use about Keystone?
I think to describe the best journey, the 3 words I would say would be enlightening. The data first comes out, one of my responses was, really? Is that what's going on? Or that's really good, So enlightening would be one of the words. I think followed by evolving, because the data starts to highlight areas that need for improvement. And then I think the last word for me would have been transformational. Really how you can change an organization by using the data to manage more effectively and really focus on the areas that you want to grow your services or you want to develop and provide them more effectively.
Yeah. Scott, anything catch your eye here as you look at these words and the responses from our audience?
Yeah, I mean, right dead center, Bob. Manual. I mean, that's it is the number one thing, right? And the industry just is not positioned to leverage the advancing technologies to automate, to create automation and save people boatloads of time. And that automation takes a little time to create in certain situations, but then once it's built, it's built. So I think manual is the biggest thing that we hear.
Yeah. And it's a great transition to what we're going to really try and talk about next. And, as you look at this architecture slide, I'll just start with the reporting being in the center here. So however you create your insights or your KPIs or your reporting, those are the management insights. I think the biggest point here is somehow you need to make that available to end users, right? So maybe cloud-based with user permission so that they only see the reporting that you want. But this is the problem, right? The problem sits on this backside. It's all these disparate systems, the data locked down in each of these disparate systems, and then the manual efforts to pull data to create the reporting. And what's not represented here on this backside is as you pull data from each disparate system, the opportunity to create a data warehouse where now you have data from all your different systems, source systems in one place to not only feed reporting that maybe one of these systems can do with the data within them, but to create reporting that none of these systems can create because you have the data from all of them. So this idea of the data warehouse, the ETL process of pulling data, it's really different, right? For larger organizations that have resources versus smaller. And that's the thing we want to get to in these next questions. So Greg, as the larger organization, what can you share about, your experience and efforts to create the data warehouse and create reporting using data from disparate systems?
Well, working in multi-states, sometimes we have mandated different EHRs. We have, trying to pull data from an HRIS system that maybe, working in multi-states, a different field might be named. So there's the data literacy element and aligning data elements across of it becomes critical when you're trying to look at data across multiple states. I think one of the focuses that we had to do is getting the right people in the room to have these kind of conversations on this. And being larger, we formed a steering committee that literally made sure we had an IT representative and that was helping manage this. Operations was in the room. We had our quality manager, our vice president of quality in there. And so along with, we'd bring in HR, other systems as appropriate, so we could explain how we're using the data, what it's called, why is this field named this? It could be named this in one system, and it's how does that get represented so it's meaningful? Because each large data platform, they come up with these fields that you have to understand what's being entered in there and why it's called and what that information means. So for us, it became critical to kind of map that out through a steering process to form a data lake, because if you're throwing in everything, you really can't organize it so you can pull it out. It becomes garbage in, garbage out kind of a message here. So organizing that information, making sure you can do it, that it gets interpreted correctly and it gets reported correctly so it can become effective, was important for us. I think the other thing, when you look at this, it can become very overwhelming. And to Scott's point early, it has to be simple. And you really have to focus on the end user to getting that information. So for us, the steering committee and having that process developed it helped us to prioritize. We saw all this possibility. You look at this slide alone, and you can just start saying, "Wow, health tracking and citation management and instant management." You just can't throw this out all at once. You have to prioritize what gets developed. You have to make sure that you have the training associated with it, so when it does go out, that you're who's going to get that information. And then one of the things that's critical that you do with any sort of KPI is you have to then integrate it into some sort of management practice or management process. You have to make sure it's getting looked at routinely, that the right people are looking at it, and that's getting, get managed and monitored so you're using it effectively. And if you don't do that, it's not going to be effective overall.
Yeah. Just a quick insight, Greg, in Keystone as a large provider, how big's your IT staff?
42 FTE.
42 FTEs. All right.
Yeah.
Scott.
Now, I will say this out of the process. One of the things is, that FTE was created out of the demand to get some of this information out, and what was also we didn't just add it. As we became more effective and efficient, we created the margin to develop those staff overall.
Yeah. Scott, you work with all kinds of size of providers and especially small providers. Maybe some insights, especially on the smaller provider side, on how your organization helps them to do this work as well, maybe.
Yeah, I think as you look at this, one of the biggest lifts and hardest parts is the ETL process, right? It's getting the data from those source systems and pulling it into your repository, and that usually happens in one of four different ways. One is having a whole mirror image of the database and what they term as a reporting server that you can grab any of the data anytime. And that mirror image is updated every 5 minutes. Then you have APIs where you can call into a data set and grab data that you want. And more and more vendors now are creating what's called an SFTP push, where you can take specific reports or components of the data, put it on a schedule, and have it pushed out every night. And they like that because it's less costly to them, but it still works fine. It just limits you to certain things. And then the other one is running a manual report and pulling the data and using it there. As smaller providers approach this, that's a daunting task. So I would advise, if you're looking at this to automate it, that you kind of look for help with that, because to go through that by yourself and investigating it, if you have limited resources, can take a long time. You would want to get someone who understands that process, understands the technology in that process. The other point, though, Bob, that's important, getting the data is just step one. Once you have the data, you got to know what data it is that is relevant for what you're trying to do, and that can be daunting. So, when Greg references their IT staff, there are people within Keystone that are specialists within each of the core systems. They have Workday and they have CareLogic and they have different major systems. People understand those systems, and those people are invaluable when it comes to getting data or a change in the system that needs to occur, and then understanding the rippling effect of that in your reporting. But as a smaller provider, you have to think about who is going to be the expert of those systems, and for probably most smaller providers, that isn't their only job. They're going to have multiple jobs, but it's a key role to have a data specialist that understands and manages the data of the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to be conscious of time because I know we're going to get to some really strategic things that are complex here as we move forward. But just real quick, when you think about bringing that data from different sources, just wanted to share a couple insights in what you can do. So here's an example of taking data from incidents from the state reporting, right, and combining it with, this is actually HRST data. So in states that mandate HRST from intellectability, now I can have the health risk score, the healthcare level data, and the incidents in one dashboard. Select one consumer. This would be their name. Obviously, a complex person has 7 risk factors. Click on that, and then it would be just their data, their score, and their incidents. So you can do even further risk stratification in a clinical example. And then another example is, here's a CFO that during COVID, couldn't wait until the end of the month and finance closed to understand what was going on and what was happening, because an external market force like COVID changed the way they needed to operate. So weekly, she started to grab data from the EHR billing system and from HR system and build a finance report where every week she could then bring to the leadership team, individuals served, billed units per week by program, revenue by week, billed units per week by funding source, again, revenue by funding source, and then productivity, which if you think about the market force that occurred here, this was critical. You had residential programs that had staffing issues, right? But you had staff that couldn't meet because it was day programming and we weren't allowed to meet. How could you leverage and maybe solve some of those problems? So just wanted to share two quick examples of what you can do when you get that integration done with your data and create reporting that none of those systems can create on their own. So just two quick examples. And so then we thought, a topic that might be, speaking of external market forces like COVID, we thought maybe it would be good to share a little bit about an external market force that's going on in Pennsylvania right now. And if you're not aware, and you're thinking, well, why should I care what's going on in Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania has implemented, starting this January, the most detailed, let's say, alternative payment method in the country. So providers in PA, IDD providers in PA have to report 70 plus measures. They're paid in 3 different tiers or rates and have the opportunity to earn performance bonuses. And the reason you should care about what's going on in Pennsylvania is that whatever state you're in, your state director goes to a national conference called NASD. And I'll tell you who was on the podium last year at NASD. It was the PA executive director, Kristen Ahrens, and her consultant, Mercer, talking about what was happening and what they were trying to do in PA. So all other states are looking. Scott, can you share a little bit on what's happening here in PA?
I think we should do one of those word collages, Bob, and I think it's mayhem. Mayhem is the word in the middle. If you think about this, Bob made it a point early on there to say that there's over 70 measures, and some of those measures aren't KPIs. Some of them are you have to attest that you have a plan for something, right? So they're not all KPIs. However, for an industry that has not been detailed in this area, to go from 0 to 70 is a big deal, and people are scrambling just to submit. And the way that it works is you have to submit a survey that puts you into those tiers, and then based on your submission, you have to attest that the data is accurate and correct, and they put you into one of those tiers. Not only was it mayhem getting that, I would say the majority of the providers in the state still don't understand. They thought that was the event, just to submit it, and that was step one. So where people are working now is, okay, now that I have these metrics, here's where I am. How do I put initiatives in place to drive improvement in these metrics so that I can improve my tier? And that's a huge lift for people, Bob. It is a massive undertaking, and I think a lot are struggling to organize themselves to do that because they don't have the resources. It's not like you can go hire someone to be in charge of this, so they're tapping everybody across the organization. And then Bob's showing some examples of kind of concepts of this, and you can see where it has PBC metrics. Those are specific ones, but not all of them. When you're looking at this from that balanced scorecard concept, not all of them will be PBC. But as you look at this, it's a short-term and long-term perspective. They make the mistake in the state of Pennsylvania. They are stack ranking the providers, and those that perform are going to be in a better, more powerful position than those who do not. So understanding where you are and understanding where you're going is an absolute critical component.
And Greg, having living this, because it's not going right, living this, what should providers in other states glean or be thinking as they see what's happening here in PA?
Yeah, I think this is an initiative that could have a significant impact across the country because they're moving to an outcome-based system, and literally while the licensing authority isn't saying that the idea is to lessen the number of providers, that's the main goal. They produced a lot of data when they first started this initiative that they spend about 80% of their time on 20% of the most poorly performing providers. And I think there's a significant effort to move to this outcome system to have poorly performing providers out of Pennsylvania in general, and to make sure that the data that they're managing to is transparent, and we're managing to a uniform set. So it's interesting, part of these metrics that we're now monitoring that are in place, sometimes we didn't even have access to, such as, the state was keeping this data on the back end. So getting that out in front of us and being able to see what they're managing to has been, it's been interesting. In some cases, mayhem is a good word here. And again, now we have these new measures that we've had to create performance indicators on to work with the BI Collaborative and their team to get some of these measures up. Now, it's interesting, when we did the balanced scorecard, I will say this, not all of it was based upon performance-based contracting. There are measures outside of this that are critical to our mission. So while we did a lot of it was focused on ensuring that workforce is credentialed through NADSP. That's a new requirement. That incidents are closed timely within 30 days. That had to be an initiative. HRST is done. All these measures that were relatively new for us, that became new KPIs that were more process measures that we had to incorporate into practice.
Yeah, great. So the transition here is, just because you create the reporting, that doesn't make you a data-driven organization. And so now we're going to get to some topics that are really the success factors. And, when you think about what we've talked about so far, it's really what's on the left side of this slide, where you have to do the work to have the infrastructure, the digitization, and the reporting, right? But it's really about how you use that data and how you're leveraging that data for the things on the right side of this slide. So as we think about those elements, let's talk about some topics and some frameworks related to not just reporting. And I'll start with Harvard published a really good framework that we provided here. And obviously you can have this and use this as you sort of assess yourself internally. And it starts with, obviously the digitization, creating the reporting and the analytics and the operations and new ways of doing things. But I'll just real quickly just say, as an example, when you think about starting with your people and digitizing your people, it's the individuals you serve and your employees, and going back to all those disparate systems. As you implement each one of those systems, you need to have that common denominator to tie both your employees and your individuals you serve in each of those systems, so that you don't have to do mappings later, right? And that you can leverage that data to create insightful and sort of reflective reporting using all of that. So this is a good framework. You can use this, reflect on it, use it to spur conversations in your organizations as you look at this Harvard's model. But Scott, you also created a roadmap, and again, we focused a lot on the middle here. Maybe you want to speak to why you created this and focus a little bit on the front end and the back end that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've done this for a good part of my professional career, and as you think about it, these were kind of the 8 keys to moving it forward, and as you look at the ones on the left, and Greg talked to this, and Keystone is very good at this. Data is a team sport. Data is not just an IT responsibility. Data is an everybody responsibility. And it starts with data governance, which most providers do not have, right? So understanding that data governance and that data team, putting this structure in place to be able to move it forward is a key component. And as you look at kind of the people that sit on these teams on the right, the who, they're multidisciplinary. So it as Greg said, you're getting different lens at the table to break down those silos and to create additional insights. You'd be surprised how many decisions are made in silos that say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to implement something new in EHR where they never talk with finance, and so the structure that's there is completely not aligned, which creates all kind of problems. But having this multidisciplinary team helps with that. So on that side of it, Bob, those two are critical. As you went to the other side of it, Greg and I get along so well because we're disciples of of oh gosh, I forgot his name, Greg.
Stephen Covey.
Stephen, no.
Drucker.
Peter Drucker. I was going to say Stephen Covey, Bob. But as you think about it, the technology is just a tool. And one of Peter Drucker's most famous sayings is culture eats strategy for lunch or for breakfast, right? And so having the technology, just creating the dashboard, I'm going to tell you right now, with all seriousness, that will not get you where you need to be. You have to create a culture that reinforces it, that fosters it, and you look at number 7, it's understanding education and training on it, because now you're spreading information and data out to people who have never seen it before, and they don't understand what it means or how it works. That whole component is critical, but embedding this as one of your DNAs within your culture, and there's a lot of different ways you can do that, is one of the cores to succeeding.
Greg, any comments on either the governance, the data literacy, the culture that you think would be great insights for people from a lessons learned?
Well, for me, it's all been what have we achieved over the last 6 years here at Keystone. Taking a lot of these blueprints, these kind of concepts, putting data into practice. So overall, I will say this: the last 3 or 4 years, using kind of looking at what was important, recruiting, retention, HR metrics, quality metrics, staff satisfaction, elements that we continue to refine and evolve. Overall, we have increased the retention of the organization. Over the last 6 years, we've increased DSP pay by $7 an hour. Our DSP vacancy rate varies between 4 and 12%, depending on the region and area. We're down from 24% when we got here, in practices that are put in place to make us more effective, efficient, and basically reward staff, find high performers, create a system that really, as you gain efficiencies, as you have things and you have high performing teams, you're able to reward those overall, and not only support your mission, but have a mission that your staff can see, and they can see the results, and you're sharing those results, which is creating behavioral momentum across the whole organization for improvement. So having that idea where you're going, this roadmap, as Covey likes to say, begin with the end in mind. So I put your Covey quote in there. You really can, you want to know where you got to know where you want to be, and using and putting the steps in place to get there, and then rewarding your teams on that, so they see the culmination of their efforts in positive ways.
What I love about your comments there, Greg, is that everyone on the call, you can see the culture of being data-driven just exemplified there. And Greg wasn't looking at a sheet with those metrics, right? They were like on the top of his tongue, because that's how they manage and that's how they live, right? So I just love that. So as we wrap up, Scott, you got a final comment here?
Yeah, one quick comment on Greg, and I was going to say the same point. He's rattling these things off. And he was the genesis for this at Keystone, right? So it started with Greg, and before Greg had support, he was doing it in Excel, pulling the information by himself, because he knew that was the information that he needed to manage. And then his direct reports all learned from him that, okay, these are important things that we need to watch. And now they're pushing things down to directors, where they're disseminating financial data and quality data down to directors. So they're becoming a data-driven organization, because it's democratizing that information to others, and that just has a rippling effect on performance.
And they've automated a lot of that and moving it out of Excel. That's through the technology adoption. So as we close, I guess the next question for the audience, as you think about and looked at some of the success factors, what are some of the challenges at your organizations as you start to think about either where you are in this journey or beginning this journey, be curious to just see where the marketplace is in how you're feeling. There we go. It comes right back to being underfunded over time, not having the resources, capacity, time, resources, funding, culture. Changing metric. Talent. So Scott, as we close, as these words are coming up, maybe reflect on these words, and then we'll flip it over to, you've got a lot of experiences taking different size organizations through the journey. And maybe you can share some common challenges, but maybe some quick comments on these words first before we get to the common challenges you've experienced.
Yeah, I think, you look at funding and time as kind of the two big ones there, right? I think you have to invest some time into understanding the funding and what's required. It may not be what you think it is. There, I'm sure it's not cheap, but it's not overwhelming, and it's not something that has to be done all at once. Go back to our point of, simpler is better. It is an evolution and it is a journey. So starting small, you can do a lot with a little bit of money related to that. So that's number one. Number two, the time component it's an investment in time, because the time that it takes to do, you're going to get back 4 or 5-fold just through the automation. And where people are today, you're already spending the time. People are just doing it manually in Excel, right? And so a lot of that gets eliminated, and you're much more informed to be able to move the organization.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, back to when I showed you our organization, the BI Collaborative's reporting slide. Just quick plug, that's the work that we do, right? So it's not just the reporting, it is the automation of the pulling the data and creating the reporting. And the business model is modular. You don't have to do the whole platform. Start somewhere, solve some problem, and it's very cost effective. So Scott, in summary, again, like I said, you do this with a lot of organizations. What would you sort of share from an experience standpoint as we close?
Well, that number one is a big one. We talked about it, right? So, you do need to establish a data governance team that goes across the organization. It's just an absolute critical part, and it needs to be multidisciplinary to do that. One of the things that you'll have to address early on, and it is where people make a mistake, is they don't get started because they say their data is not good. And in fact, that's the reason why you get started. It's not going to get cleaned up any other way. By doing this initiative, you create transparency of that data. And I can tell you, everybody that we work with has data quality issues. They are to various degrees, but everybody has them. And the only way to get rid of them is to work through it. And it is a detailed process. But that isn't just in human services. That's in any company, in any industry. As you look at some of these other pieces that are listed there, looking at the kind of the breaking the silos and creating the vision and framework, it goes back to the other point that was on the wordsmith, the word chart was, culture. It becomes a great tool to move and change the culture in an industry that's going to transform. And there's nothing we can do about that. It's coming. And so you have to get started. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes time.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple minutes. We mentioned at the beginning, if you had questions, to put them in the chat. I just checked the chat. There doesn't seem to be questions, There is one that says, will the slides be available? Because you registered, we will send the slides out. What you'll also get is you will automatically get a recording of this from the meeting. So you get both. You're going to get the slides and the recording. If someone wants to put a question in the chat, we'd be happy to address it right now in the last 1 or 2 minutes. And if not, what I'm going to put up here next is actually my contact information. Well, I forgot to make this closing point actually as well. So it's not just a good idea to be data-driven. There is good research out there from McKinsey, Aberdeen, some globally really well-recognized organizations. Data-driven organizations are 30% more likely to reach their goals. They're more profitable and way more compliant with regulations. So again, not just a good idea, but great documentation. And with the importance of licensure in this industry, the compliance is a big deal. So again, this is my information. If anybody wants to reach out, send an email, send a question via email, happy to respond to anything that you send. Certainly, if you wanted to schedule time, you can do that as well. And again, we will send the slides out. I don't see anything coming through the chat. And so with that, we're going to be right on time and maybe give you a minute back. So thank you for attending. Greg, thank you so much for your time and being on the panel. Scott, thank you for your experiences.
Yep. Greg,
and,
thank you.
Mariana from ANCOR, you're a great partner. And sorry we had a technical, would have loved your introduction. But again, thank you, everyone. And again, reach out anytime. Enjoy your day.
Everyone.